right now. Pittsburgh's best sports show is about to begin. Call us or tweet us. We've got things to talk about on the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Ray, and welcome everybody to the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call. I'm your host, Josh Taylor. Usually I'm in on a Friday and Saturday night, but tonight we're on a Thursday, and we still got stuff to talk about. Maybe we'll even talk about Paul Skeens' trading card. I don't know how shiny it is, but we can discuss that and a few other things. We're definitely going to talk some Pirates. The Penguins make a big signing in free agency, bringing back one of their guys from last season. We can talk about that as well, and we will do that tonight with my guest. He's joining us in studio. Hey, Jason Mackey from the Post-Gazette. Jason, let's start with the Pirates here. And this is something you and I and Megan had a discussion about off air. Brian Reynolds, the tear that he's on in the month of June right now and just how hot he's been. I think I talked about it a couple weekends ago. I talked about it dating back to May 13th when he had that 5-for-5 game. I believe it was against Milwaukee last month. But the thing that sticks out to me from that time last month, Derek Shelton, before that game, in his pregame radio interview, talked about how he felt like Brian Reynolds was ready to break out. Since then, he's just been on an absolute tear. He's one of the top hitters in the National League in the month of June in batting average, OPS, slugging percentage, just hitting really well right now. But then recently, Derek Shelton used a word that you and I both kind of raised an eyebrow, and so did Megan Schiller, the word hitterish. Derek Shelton says Brian Reynolds looks hitterish right now. First of all, what is your definition of hitterish? And second of all, how does that apply to what we've seen from Brian Reynolds recently?
It's tremendous, Josh. I love it. I can't wait to say something to Shelty tomorrow. As many people know, I have a running gag with Shelty where we joke about words that he uses. Usually they're like SAT words. If he uses a big word, he makes sure to point it out to me. I keep track of them on my phone. Hitterish is absolutely going in there, so that's going to be added. Anyway, what Shelty means, and by the way, Pirates brass apparently should just say guys are poised for a breakout, because Ben Cherington said something similar with Rowdy Tellez, and then he caught fire, and then here you go with Brian Reynolds. But with Reynolds, I mean, a lot of times this means his left-handed swing is in sync. He's hitting the fastball better than he ever has before. Really, throughout his career, he's been just feasting on heat. I understand what Shelty's saying about he's into his legs. He's got a solid base. I mean, you're not going to hit anything if your legs are moving around, if you're jumping at the ball. That's been another issue with Brian Reynolds in the past. But, I mean, he's just locked in. He's been this way throughout his career. I've covered him since he broke in 2019. He loves hitting in June. He's always put up a lot of good numbers this month, but he's just in a special place. The game's slowing down for him. The ball looks bigger. That's a little bit of what hitterish means, but that's also, maybe gibberish, to use a word that sounds similar.
If I'm not mistaken, in the month of June, I might have my numbers wrong here. I believe the Pirates are 9-6 in the month of June, I believe it is, with the tear that he's on. Of course, he's not doing it by himself. He's also doing it with some help, because there's another thing to point out. When Paul Skeens is on the mound, the Pirates are 6-1 this season, and we're expecting to see him this weekend against the Rays. We're expecting to see Jarrett Jones as well. And it comes to the point now, Jason, where we're getting into that period where, and I think I mentioned this during the sportscast, they've won 4 of their last 5 series. We're getting into that part of the season where, that division and playoff race is starting to separate a little bit. It's a little clogged in the National League, but winning series becomes really important if you're going to stay in that race. So when you look at this series on paper and you see Skeens and Jones going against Tampa, you got to feel good about it.
Absolutely, Josh. Absolutely. And it's a situation where they should certainly be able to take 2 of 3 from Tampa. The Tampa Bay Rays have been really good in recent years, but this is not necessarily one of them. They play in a brutal division, but this team should theoretically be there for the taking for the Pirates. And the Pirates at home recently have fared very well in series play. You're talking about beating the Dodgers, the Braves, the Reds, the Twins. I mean, these are teams that are no slouches. They've played extremely well at home, and the Pirates have set themselves up with a pretty good recipe. They've been getting good starting pitching, as you mentioned, with Paul Skeens. Jarrett Jones has been a little cool lately. He's due for one of his typical starts. Mitch Keller is not going to pitch in the series. We'll see what they do tomorrow. Very possible that's a bullpen game. I have Martin Perez circled as somebody who could return this weekend. Maybe he slots in there. But you need the bats to wake up. They got a little fortunate against the Reds. They scratched across just enough runs to score to win those games. But the bats need to wake up a little bit, need to get more out of Connor Joe, need to get more out of O'Neal Cruz. Brian Reynolds has certainly done his part along with Rowdy Tellez, but a few guys quiet at the moment.
412-575-2600. That is the number. Give us a call there, or you can shoot me a tweet at Josh Taylor HD. We will take a break. When we come back, we've got our tweet of the night. We're reading your tweets, and we're taking your phone calls. So stick around. Welcome back. Time for our GMC Sierra tweet of the night. It comes from the Pirates. Top 1% in expected opponent batting average plus slugging percentage. Top 2% in opponent exit velocity. 8 consecutive outings without allowing a run. Colin Holderman is shoving. And Jason Mackey, who's joining me right now on the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call. Jason, just about by every metric, Colin Holderman's been good. And any measurement you can think of, he's been one of the best relievers in baseball. And a lot of times you look at guys' numbers and you look at the eye test, he's passing both right now. And if there's anything you're looking at as far as maybe a strength of this team, I know there was some wavering on the bullpen as of late, but if there's been one guy who's been rock solid throughout, it's been Colin Holderman.
He's been incredible, Josh. He really has. And David Bednar got off to a slow start. Aroldis Chapman had a really poor May. Colin Holderman has been rock solid all along. And if you remember back to spring training, he was one of those guys that contracted the weird illness that was going around Bradenton, was actually in a hospital at least one time, maybe two if I'm remembering correctly, but lost a bunch of weight, was out for weeks. It's just they never really figured out what it was. It was just something that made its way through the clubhouse, and he missed a lot of time, but he has come back and been absolutely fantastic. I can't believe this is a guy they got for Daniel Vogelbach.
Right?
I mean, as much heat as the Pirates have taken for making poor trades, and I'm not defending them, it's deserved, but Colin Holderman has been an absolute steal. Throwing the sinker in the upper 90s, the cutter, he's turned into a really terrific high-end reliever, and he's been a huge part of this bullpen and will continue to be a huge part of the bullpen.
I was in a discussion not too long ago. I can't remember with whom and I can't remember where, but the discussion was about Ben Cherington's best trades. And the Colin Holderman for Daniel Vogelbach trade came up, and by the time we were done, I think a few of us were starting to lean over toward that trade because the more we thought about it, the more it made sense that might be his best move as far as the trade market to date. 412-575-2600 is the number. Give us a call. We got Mark in Peters Township. You're on the Nightly Sports Call.
Hi, guys. I'm a first-time caller and
appreciate
the show.
Hey, Mark.
I watched the 71 World Series Game 7 on TV last night. It got me to thinking about how the really good teams seem to have a good power hitter. Then it was Bob.
I think I know where Mark was going with this one, and I tend to agree with this, Jason, but not necessarily in terms of like having a lineup stacked with power hitters, but you need to have a guy or two that's able to pop one over the wall when you need it. If you're even looking at Pirates teams, you go back a decade ago, you had guys like Pedro Alvarez, you had guys like Andrew McCutchen, even Marlon Byrd, a guy who can pop one over the wall when you needed him to. You don't need to have 1 through 9 stacked with 30 home run guys, but every lineup on a team that's worth its own salt probably has a guy or two that can provide that power when you need it.
Yeah, I mean, here's where I come down on that. I mean, nobody's looking at these Pirates to look like the 1971 Pirates. That's a little bit of a stretch. Baseball was different. I'm not looking at these Pirates to be anything like recent World Series champions. That, too, would be crazy.
Yep.
But if you look at their lineup 1 through 9, they shouldn't have as many holes as they currently have. And, I mean, that's where I come down on it, where if you're giving outfield reps to somebody, i.e. Jack Sawinski, Connor Joe at times, Edward Olivares, like those guys can't not be pulling their weight, pardon the double negative, and the Pirates have had too much of that recently. So, I mean, you need key home runs, but you need consistent pressure. You need to not have weak spots, and that's been, the Pirates a couple of years ago would have 6, 7 weak spots in their lineup. I think they're down to 2 or 3 now, which is great, but as we near the trade deadline, it's absolutely on Ben Cherington to address that. Maybe Rowdy Tellez has taken care of one of those questions at first base. That would be great. But again, you have to get an outfield bat if you're me, in my opinion. Michael A. Taylor hasn't been what they expected him to be or wanted him to be. And offensively, they're at least 1 bat short and maybe 2.
And there's a couple of them out there. I'm going to keep saying this until he's either moved or the trade deadline's come and gone. As long as Luis Robert is walking the planet and he's still in Chicago, he's out there, he's attainable. He's worth, at least at the very least, a phone call. I think it's something worth looking into. Anthony in Greensburg, you're on the Nightly Sports Call.
Hey, gentlemen, it's good to be on with you. Hey, Jason, I'm glad you're on tonight because you stole my thunder on a couple points
I'm sorry.
Mike Wade Taylor thinks they need to go get a couple bats for this outfield. Bob Nutting has to put his money into this major league team to prove to fans. They have the pitching this year, as long as they don't shut those young guys down. They have the pitching. The bullpen's coming around. Go get a couple bats, maybe another arm for the bullpen, and this team has a chance. I mean, go do it. Like, what are they waiting for?
That's a good point, Anthony. Appreciate the call. Jason, you and I have talked about this. They need at least a bullpen arm or two. They could probably use an outfield bat, maybe even a corner infield bat. And to his point about investing money in it all, well, who are two of the guys that have been the most consistent guys this season? Brian Reynolds and Mitch Keller, and they paid big contracts for both. So it's a good starting point. But like he's saying, you got to be able to augment it and complement it. You got at least the foundation going, but you got to add more onto it to complete the picture.
Let me add something to this discussion that's kind of weird, and don't take this as a defense of Bob Nutting. This is just kind of where things are at. I know I get crushed for this sometimes, but I mean, Bob Nutting believes that he has spent enough to put a winning team on the field, and they expect to win. Now, I know fans are going to disagree with that, and they're going to say, no, they haven't. He hasn't spent anywhere near enough. I'm not saying he has. What I'm saying is intent. And so as you get to the trade deadline, Bob wants to win. He thinks they should win. And if Ben Cherington goes to him and says, look, we need a bat, this is what we need to win, Bob's going to okay it, within reason. Like, they're not going to go sign a $30 million player. I'm not saying anything insane. What I'm saying is they do recognize that they need help. They've admitted that. The only reason, Anthony, that they haven't done anything yet is to look at the calendar. I mean, it's still more than a month out from the trade deadline. Nobody's doing anything. It's not like the rest of Major League Baseball is making a bunch of moves and the Pirates are sitting it out. It's just this is a staring contest. This is the way it's going to be. But when push comes to shove in late July, when teams are doing things, I do believe that the Pirates are going to improve their lineup.
That's totally fair in terms of how the season tends to progress. In mid to late June, right now, your trade market is pretty much looking at the roster of the White Sox and maybe looking at the roster of the Marlins and seeing what makes sense. That might be your trade market right now because as we talk about this right now, yes, there's 3 division leaders and there's 3 wild card teams in the National League, but there's also 7 teams within a game and a half of a wild card spot. So we're talking, 13 teams right now? Even though their records don't look great, they're still somewhat in contention of trying to stay in the playoff race. So these 13 teams that we're talking about in theory are all going to be looking at what they can do to improve and try to stay in it within the next month or so. Will a couple fall off? Maybe. But at the same time, will there be more teams maybe involved in the trade market? Possibly, and that could make it more complicated for the Pirates as far as what they're trying to acquire. Let's go with Tom in Plum. You're on the Nightly Sports Call.
Hey, guys. Thanks for taking my call.
Appreciate you.
Just wanted to bring up Peguero. Really liked him last year. Obviously haven't seen much of him this year, but not even possibly using him this year, but in a possible trade. What do you guys think about dealing him maybe with someone else to look for that bat that we need so desperately? Because I think he's going to be a really nice.
For those of you who noticed, I was putting the Dr. Evil finger to my lips because that's a name, Jason, that if I'm looking at a trade for a guy that could be really beneficial and help you immediately, not just a guy you plug in the lineup that fills a spot, but I mean a guy who comes in and changes your lineup immediately. Liover Peguero might be a guy that I'm looking at to send in return because as it stands right now, Nick Gonzalez is at second base and O'Neal Cruz is at short. He's pretty much blocked organizationally. He could become a nice chip in a trade.
Well, and look at the other direction too, Josh. You've got Tamar Johnson, who, unless something changes, will eventually be here. I'm certainly not giving up hope on Tamar. And I understand why that Peguero would be a trade chip. I mean, you're talking about a former top 10 prospect. Mm-hmm. I don't see where he fits with this current lineup. I'm not taking Nick Gonzalez out. I realize he's 0 for his past 14, something like that. You're obviously not taking Cruz out of the lineup. There's not a lot of places to play. Peguero, frankly, hasn't been that good at shortstop defensively. I'm not sure if he can handle that. But, yeah, I mean, if there's another team willing to take him, I know my boy Noah Hiles made some waves on the Fan and social media today talking about a Jack Sawinski and Liover Peguero trade for potentially J.J. Bleday from Oakland. Not saying that like the two sides have talked, saying one source, and this is Noah's reporting, one organizational source told him that's about an equal value. I don't know how I feel about that, but if you're able to package Peguero with something to get the bat they need, absolutely. I don't see where Peguero fits, and if he has trade value, do it.
Noah Hiles stirring the pot? Perish the thought. No, I'm kidding. Shout out to Noah. It does create an interesting scenario as far as guys that could have some value, maybe not top tier, bring a top tier guy back value, but if you can put one of those guys maybe in a package with a couple of other players that maybe have a little bit more pedigree, you can bring back that pitcher that you're looking for. You can bring back that outfield bat or maybe that corner infield bat that supplements this lineup. And that's something that we have about another, 5 or 6 weeks to figure out as we go. But we got to take another break. We'll wrap up when we come back. Stick around. Because that was something that was announced today by Kyle Dubas. 2 years, $2.5 million a season for what he did last year. He became the guy that they pretty much relied upon that final month of the season. It feels like a really good value for a guy that they've really become, really reliant upon. But my next question to you, because it seems like the goaltender situation is at least on paper, somewhat settled. You need a bunch of forwards outside of your top two lines. You only got 4 defensemen under contract. Granted, P.O. Joseph is a restricted free agent. Only about $10, maybe $11 million in cap room. What's the next most logical move in your mind, Jason, for Kyle Dubas right now? Is it a trade? Is it a signing? What works right now?
Well, in my mind is probably not the same as what's in Kyle Dubas's mind, and that would be to move Erik Karlsson. I don't see a return on investment, and I realize that's kind of a big one. I'm not expecting that to happen, but I'm just saying if you're going to free up some cap space, to me that's a place from which you can deal. More realistic moves, I'm looking at a Riley Smith. I wouldn't expect him to be sticking around here long. My partner at the Post-Gazette, Matt Venzel, had a pretty good piece this week positing that Patrick Laine would make a lot of sense in that spot. You could kind of buy low. The Columbus Blue Jackets might be willing to take back some money. They could take a Riley Smith contract, whatever. I also wonder about Rickard Rakell, whether there's a fit for him on this team. Last year was not very good for him. You would be selling an asset at its lowest point. But if you're committed to, Brian Rust, Drew O'Connor, Michael Bunting, and somebody else, those are your top 6 wing spots. And does Rakell add value in the bottom 6? Not really. So, those are 2 guys I'm looking at, but I agree with you, Josh. You need to find a way to somehow free up money. The Jari situation, to me, is as cloudy as ever with Nedeljkovic and what that means. I don't necessarily think it means a trade, but I do think the Penguins could potentially free up some money if they do decide to move on from Jari.
And we still got plenty of time to figure this out. It's only going into late June. July 1st is when things really start to kick off. But we are out of time. For Jason Mackey, for our producer, Steve Benko, and our team here at KDKA, I'm Josh Taylor saying thanks for watching. Thanks for your calls. Thanks for your tweets. It's you guys that make the show great. And we're here for you 7 nights a week on the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call. See you back here tomorrow.